and I asked them to test the app. It was a web app. So it was a Tetris game. So they played the game, and when they played the game, I asked them, do you guys have any questions? They said, no, you're hired.
Do you like your career? Really? Do you want to change it? Well, you're at the right place. We can help you. Here at Wema DevOps, we can train you. We can help you to not only just change your career, but also to actually succeed in it. Welcome to Wema DevOps.
Join a thriving community of learners and professionals at Wema DevOps, where you can get training, coaching, and counseling on your journey into the DevOps industry. Register now at wemadevops.com and become a DevOps engineer today.
My name is Josias, and I attended a class 32 with Prof. Ken was my teacher, my bootcamp teacher. So right now I've been a DevOps engineer for 7 months because I started working in March. I've been having a lot of challenges. I am really happy to be here because I'm going to share some of the challenges and what the training has brought to me, because I've really learned a lot. Yeah, maybe when time comes, I'll go into more details because I have a lot of little challenges and stories that, came at work, and I would really love to share with you guys today.
So, Josiah, your first question, how did you prepare for your interviews?
To be honest, if I have to give a summary, I applied for 225 jobs. I got 7 interviews before getting hired. So just for you to know. So I mostly learned from my first interviews. I mean, the first obstacle or the first problem that every candidate will face is fear. First thing is you shouldn't be afraid of the panel. And I noticed that some of them, they don't know this much, honestly, right? So being scared, and they can read from your facial expressions that this candidate is scared. So my first interviews, I was really scared. I remember that one of the guys told me that, honestly, you just go and get trained again. I felt so bad, It was a very simple position. He asked me some questions on AWS. He asked some basic questions, but honestly, I was not prepared. As Alma said, I didn't have good hands-on training. So what really helped me in my interview preparation, I'll be actually 100% honest, is our bootcamp with Prof. Ken. So when we started, we had this morning devotion. So Prof was asking questions, you answer, and he'll help you if you have some difficulties. For example, I remember the interview that got me hired. It was about security. And I remember that just like few days before that, we had a full course on security. And they asked me a simple question: how do you secure your environment? And I could just remember all the words of Prof. Ken coming back. So for me, 2 keys: hands-on, but also making sure to take as much interviews as possible, because you have to get used to the panel. Those people are kind of frightening. The day my interview, I had like 1 Kubernetes engineer, I had a senior cloud support engineer, I had a senior infrastructure engineer, all of them seniors. So honestly, I had all the reasons to be scared, but I was still. And another key is that I learned how to listen. Don't rush. Don't be on a haste to answer a question. Take your time. If you don't understand what the recruiter asks, ask him to repeat the question. Because my first 6 interviews, I was also on a haste. Sometimes they will ask the question, and I'm not even sure I got the question 100%, and I will start answering. And they'll have to stop me. They'll try to rephrase the question. And when they rephrase the question once, twice, thrice, it means you're not attentive and you probably not get the role. So these are some few tricks, apart from hands-on, not being scared, and also take your time to listen, watch some previous interviews, because we had access to previous interviews. And I don't know, maybe you guys have morning devotion. Attend to as many morning devotion as possible, because I'll close by there. If you are able to answer Prof. Ken's questions, then you can answer any interview question. His questions sometimes were really tricky and kind of difficult, as compared to what I was asked, because I really had like very easy interview questions. So this is my contribution to interview preparation.
So you mentioned how what you learned from Professor Ken, how it helped you in your interview process. But can you share an experience at work where something that you based on one of your projects or something that you did, your hands-on training, how did it come through for you? Like, give me an example of a project you work on where this was something that I did, professor taught me, and because of that you had a success.
Honestly, I have a lot. My very first project, because where I got hired, the interview has 3 phases, or like 4. There's first interview with a recruiter, the one who calls you from LinkedIn. The second technical interview, not very technical, The third technical interview with real experts, and now the third phase is a project. They call it a mission. So they asked me to deploy an app from scratch. I should choose any app of my choice and deploy the app. They will not tell me the tools I have to use, and they gave me a week. So first thing I did is that I had a choice between different CI tools. I could use GitLab, SQL CI, Jenkins, or GitHub Actions. But because we were just from doing GitHub Actions with Prof. Ken, honestly, I didn't know that GitHub Action was a CI tool. I knew Jenkins, but I never know. So I learned about GitHub Actions during bootcamp. And so the company wanted somebody who is proficient with GitHub Actions, but they did not tell me. So it was up to me to find out by myself. So I called a classmate, and I to seek advice that, okay, bro, I have this project and I need to know which CI tool I'm going to use. What do you think? He said, use GitHub Actions. So I used GitHub Actions. So I designed all my workflows, and I started with the infrastructure. So I had my Kubernetes cluster that was ready. I had my VPC with all the components, the NAT gateways, the transit gateways, and so when I designed the entire infrastructure on Terraform, I pushed the code to GitHub. I created releases using semantic release, and I had a workflow that was in charge of deploying the infrastructure and pushing the modules to JFrog. So this workflow, once the infrastructure is provisioned, it is going to trigger another workflow that was to build the app, because I had a Java app, a web app. So I had one workflow that deployed the app, and another workflow that built the container and pushed the container to Docker Hub, and I had another workflow that pulled the container and that pulled the image and built the container deployed the app in my Kubernetes cluster. What they really found interesting is that the entire workflow was automated. So once I start the workflow, it deploys the infrastructure, it builds the application, it pushes the image to Docker Hub, it builds the container in Kubernetes, and I deploy the app using Argo CD. Which was something that I learned also during bootcamp. I didn't know. So when I used Argo CD, they were like, that's great, because I explained to them that Argo CD makes deployment really effective, and it makes GitHub to be the only source of truth. So that's why developers are not going to modify their deployments, from the cluster. They're going to modify from GitHub, and Argo CD is going to pull up the changes. So when I deploy the app, I use a load balancer service, to deploy the app, and I configured Route 53 because I had a domain. I bought a domain, so I used the domain, and I pasted the DNS in the comments, and I asked them to test the app. It was a web app, so it was a Tetris game. So they played the game, and when they played the game, I asked them, "Do you guys have any questions?" They said, "No, you're hired," and that was all, because I went through all the steps from the beginning to the end. I explained to them, and they wanted to know. For example, they asked me questions. Why did you choose self-hosted runners over GitHub hosted runners? I told them that actually with self-hosted runners, I can configure my own environment. I choose which tool I have to use. But with GitHub hosted runners, you have to install all the tools from scratch, because every job uses a fresh instance, and this is not actually good. And I explained, why do you choose SonarQube over Snyk? Because I use Snyk for my SAST. And they asked, and I explained to them. So it was really interesting, because they wanted to know if you have a good mastery. They didn't ask any question, and I got hired. So this was the first project, and I used GitHub Actions. I used a bit of OICD SSO because I had to configure Entra ID. There were a lot of steps, so I did everything in a way that I used Entra ID to provision a GitHub account. I used OIDC to configure the service account that GitHub would use. So they were really impressed, because I make sure I touch almost every aspect from user management and authentication to the deployment in my Kubernetes cluster, everything was just good. So they like it, and that's how I got hired. I have so many other projects, but I think this one is the one I'm really proud of, and where I use almost all the tools that were taught to us by Prof. Ken during our bootcamp.